Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're going to be taking a deep dive today into a sermon snippet from Pastor Carl Swanback, specifically focusing on those powerful words of Jesus in Matthew 11.29. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me.
Yeah, a verse I think many are familiar with, but we're going to dig a little deeper into Pastor Swanback's interpretations, which I think provide some really fresh insight.
Absolutely. So we're going to unpack those, maybe see this passage in a whole new light, huh?
That's the goal.
So one of the first things that Pastor Swanback does is he kind of delves into, what exactly Jesus is referring to when he says, take my yoke, right? Like, what are these commands? And Pastor Swanback's take is that Jesus is essentially pointing back to the original laws, the Torah.
Ah, interesting. So he's making a distinction between those original laws and what came later.
Exactly. He talks about how later on there were additions by priests, what he refers to as the oral Torah or halakha. And he seems to be saying that those later additions maybe muddied the waters a bit.
So back to the basics, sort of?
Yeah, kind of like that. And what I found really interesting is he stresses that those initial laws, those original laws from God, weren't meant to be burdensome. Especially, he says, if a believer's heart was truly aligned with God,
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. It's about the inner motivation, right?
Exactly. He gives this analogy. It's like, think about a loving partner, You're not constantly worried about betraying them because your affection, your love for them guides your actions.
Makes sense.
So similarly, he's saying those initial laws were about setting believers apart through that fundamental connection of love.
So it's more about a relationship than a set of rules.
Exactly. And then he brings in another layer to this whole yoke idea. He talks about a first century Jewish teaching found in the Talmud. Have you heard about this?
I'm familiar with the Talmud, yes.
Yeah, well, he talks about this teaching that speaks of the Shema. It's a central Jewish prayer, right?
Yeah.
And it mentions 3 yokes. The yoke of God, the yoke of Torah, and then the yoke of good deeds or mitzvah.
The 3 yokes. So how does Pastor Swanback fit this into his interpretation?
Well, he points out that the common view back then, especially among the priestly class, was that all 3 of these yokes were basically a package deal.
Like you had to take on all 3 equally.
Yeah, kind of like a, mandatory set. But Pastor Swanback, he sees things a little differently. He highlights some quotes from Jesus, like, if you love me, keep my Father's commandments, and the emphasis Jesus puts on judging by their fruits. And Pastor Swanback uses this to suggest that if you truly love God, following his commands will come naturally. It's that initial love, that connection, that's paramount.
Interesting. So almost like the other yokes flow from that first one.
Exactly. That's exactly what he's saying. He argues that the most crucial step, the first step, is taking on that yoke of God, that connection with Jesus. He even calls it and I thought this was interesting, the easiest yoke.
The easiest yoke.
The easiest yoke. He makes the case that once you have that genuine relationship with God or with Jesus, then the other 2 yokes, the Torah, and good works, they should just naturally follow. It's like an outward expression of that inner connection.
So if someone claims to be yoked to God, but their actions don't reflect it?
You're picking up what he's putting down. That's exactly it. Pastor Swanback basically says if you don't see those outward signs, that adherence to divine principles, the acts of service, the good works, then it suggests that initial connection with God, well, maybe it wasn't all that genuine to begin with. He uses this great analogy. It's like a tree, the fruit reveals the true health of that tree.
Ah, that's a good one. So Pastor Swanback has given us a lot to think about here. 2 key interpretations of Jesus' words about taking his yoke. One, that it's about getting back to the core of God's law, maybe stripping away some of the complexities added over time. And 2, that it's about prioritizing a direct relationship with God, with Jesus, as the foundation for everything else.
Yeah. And it's all connected to this idea that a genuine connection with the divine should be reflected in how we live and act.
And that really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? It's not just about saying the right words, it's about living them. So the question for all of us listening is this: what does it truly mean for you to be yoked in your own life? If you examine your actions, your fruits, what do they tell you about your connection to the divine?
A lot to ponder there. That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And until next time, keep diving.